So, I'm a booktuber who is LGBTQ, and I've read quite a few books with LGBTQ characters, and I've wanted to make a video where I recommend a bunch of said books. Now, previously I thought, okay, I'll make the video once I finish that book, or that book, or that book, etc. Eventually I just said, fuck it, and decided to make this a series of book hauls. Maybe this will be an annual thing, maybe I'll put them out whenever I damn well feel like it, or when there's some LGBT holiday. But hey, I've got quite a few books to recommend today, though the majority of them are trans and aro-ace related, because those are my areas of expertise. But if you aren't a part of those groups, don't worry. When there's representation of one group, it often comes with representation of more groups. Some of these you may have read, some of them you'll probably hear about for the first time. If you have any recommendations of your own, please feel free to leave them in the comments, along with a little teaser. But for now, let's kick things off with Dreadnot and Sovereign by April Daniels. If you're not aware, Dreadnot and its sequel Sovereign are a YA superhero story about a teenage trans girl named Danielle Tozer who happens upon the powers of the world's greatest superhero, which have the added benefit of giving her an instantaneous transition into a body more befitting of her gender identity. They are two of a planned 3 books in the Nemesis trilogy. The thing is, while the third has yet to have a set release date or even a title, the second book has a satisfying enough conclusion, and honestly, April could end the series there and I'd be completely satisfied. But enough background, let's get into the details. The world of Dreadnot is a lot like DC and Marvel. There's superpowers of every kind imaginable, science experiment gone wrong, magic bonding to a person, magic weapons, super serum, or just sci-fi tech. Superpowers exist at every level of society. From the Legion Pacifica, the best of the best, led by a Superman-like called Dreadnot, to mid-level heroes who aren't on top but still are officially recognized, to the vigilantes who fight outside the law, stopping threats like black market games that the government and law enforcement don't know about or can't do anything about. Our heroine, Danielle Tozer, is stuck living with her parents, who don't even know that she's trans at first because she has remained closeted to avoid triggering any worse treatment from them. Her father is verbally and emotionally abusive, and her mother unfortunately lacks the assertiveness to divorce him or even try to lessen his terrible treatment. It's really unpleasant to see. Danielle is buying nail polish so she can apply it to her toenails in secret. Clever. When she comes across a battle between Dreadnot and a supervillain with an extremely powerful weapon, so powerful even that Dreadnot is mortally wounded in the fight, Danielle tries to help him, but unfortunately it's a bit too late. Realizing this, he transfers his powers to Danielle. This grants her the basic superpower package, strength, speed, flight, but it has the added benefit of transforming the person's body into what they consider their ideal form, as the book describes. Because Danielle is trans, she's turned into an impossibly beautiful young woman. One thing I loved right off the bat with this book is the sassy narration. I love first-person narration with sassy lead characters, obviously. And April Daniels is one of the best I've read. It made reading a mostly enjoyable experience, but it also made the heartbreaking moments that much harder to read. When Dani goes home, it's a bit awkward and her parents have no idea what to do with her. But, following the trail of breadcrumbs, the Legion Pacifica come to find her. They bring her in for examination and explain what happened to her. Unfortunately, one of the core members of the Legion is super transphobic, and despite the Legion's best efforts at convincing her that she has to put up with the constant misgendering and denial of her identity, Dani chooses to keep them at arm's length. But the Legion weren't the only ones who noticed the change, and a lower-level vigilante crime fighter comes to Dani's house and asks for her help, and they hit it off pretty well. Very well, even. With this, Dani gets to see the darker side of her world and gets a sense of the systemic issues that plague the less fortunate of society. Things go well for a while until someone, who I won't name for spoiler reasons, comes to Dani's house and has a talk with her parents, which convinces them to call her selfish just for wanting to be herself. They end up kicking her out of the house. An unfortunate reality of many trans people in our society, especially trans kids. No, really, do you have any idea how many trans people, trans children even, are homeless? A lot more than you would think. A lot of them were abandoned by their parents who could not stand having the thought of their kid be trans. I've been incredibly fortunate to have something of a support structure and enough money to support myself, but not all of us are. And how supportive your family is unfortunately a luxury. Being blood-related does not necessarily make someone less cruel. This is a really dark part of the book, and Dani is unable to properly seek help for her situation, but she keeps fighting, and she does end up in a better place by the end. She has a support structure and a newfound family. I won't spoil too much about the sequel, but I will say it's a massive step up from the first book. The battles are more frequent and more epic, we get a better look at the world and how it really works, and we get the continuation of Dany's arc in finding a place for herself in the world. We get more characters, including a non-binary character, and I found the way the book ends to be immensely satisfying. Again, no spoilers, but it dives into how bigotry is inherently self-destructive, and often makes people side with literal fascists, and end up doing a lot more damage than they originally thought they would. But they're so caught up in their own delusions that they do it anyway. This is probably the darkest book I'm going to talk about in this video, but as with most superhero stories today, there is light to challenge the darkness. Eventually, all will be well. Our next recommendation is, oddly enough, one of the few non-fantasy or sci-fi books I'm going to be recommending today, Melissa by Alex Gino, a story about another closeted trans girl named Melissa. This book is told in third person, but it lets you in on all of Melissa's secret thoughts, as she looks for somewhere to start in coming out and socially transitioning. She does things like hide magazines of girls in swimsuits, imagining growing up to be one of them. She lives with her jock older brother and her mom, neither of which have any suspicions about her gender identity. When her school is set to put on Charlotte's Web, Melissa wishes fervently for the chance to play Charlotte in hopes that it will get people to start seeing her as a girl. Over the course of the story, she starts to make progress in coming out to people and finding places she can go to for support. Eventually, she makes a deal with her best friend, who is cast to play Charlotte, to switch places so Melissa can show the world a bit of her true self. When the book ends, Melissa is not as far along in her transition as Danielle, but we do get to see the kind of young woman she hopes to become one day. And that's something all of us hope for. Now, just having gone through 2 trans feminine book recs, I wanted to find something for the trans masks in my audience. And while finding good ones was difficult, I did manage to find a few. Starting with The Mermaid, the Witch, and the Sea. Confession time, I have a secret love of mermaids. That isn't exactly revelatory, a lot of trans people, and trans femmes like myself do, but it goes a bit further than you might think. Mermaids were the biggest sign of my feminine side when I was younger, and over the years, I developed a bit of an obsession. I never allowed myself to indulge in this obsession when I was younger, beyond Pirates 4 that is, but now that I'm older, I'm experiencing all the mermaid media I barred myself from as a kid for fear of appearing non-manly. Not all of it has been good, but this series by Maggie Tokuda Hall definitely is. It's probably the best mermaid book I've read. So what's it about? Well, Evelyn Hasegawa is a noble in an Asian-inspired evil empire, and she's getting transported on this mysterious ship called the Dove. The catch? The Dove is actually a prisoner ship that captures and sells people into slavery. This world is also full of pirates, led by the non-binary Pirate Supreme, who seems to have a connection with the ocean, which has a consciousness, like a goddess. The children of the sea, the mermaids, exist in this world as well, and they are sought after for their blood, which can grant people visions at the cost of some of their memories. There's also witches in this world with knowledge of magic that people go to for various problems. Our trans character this time is Florian, or Flora. You can call them either one, really. Also, he uses multiple pronouns. Florian was kind of forcibly brought into the crew of the Dove when he was younger in order to protect his little brother. But he doesn't really like it there, and he hates what he has to do just to survive and protect the only family he has. But then Evelyn is brought into the picture, and they start to fall for each other. Also, Evelyn is bisexual, and has previously fallen for one of her servants. But she falls for Florian while he's still boy-moding. The ship also catches a mermaid and keeps her in a barrel, which doesn't make the would-be couple feel any better. The story is about how they break free of their restrictive lives. Evelyn feeling trapped in the regal life, forced to perform a rather restrictive role, and Florian feeling unable to walk away from a life and actions he truly hates. There's also a sequel called The Siren, the Song, and the Spy, which is about several new characters, and expands on the world and the damage the Empire does when it takes over. Characters from the first book do appear, as minor supporting characters, but it's mainly about new characters. However, a lot of the themes around colonialism and control remain. Alright, you all probably guessed this was coming if you're familiar with my channel. Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, one of the 2 spin-off series in the world of Percy Jackson. If you're wondering why I'm not talking about The Son of the Star, 1, I talked about it last year, and 2, it's effectively a sequel book to the Camp Half-Blood Chronicles. For this video, I wanted to recommend books to people even if they've never read a Percy Jackson book. In case you're new here, Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard is part of the Riordanverse, the connected universe of books created by Rick Riordan. Starting with Percy Jackson and the Olympians. As the name implies, this series is about Norse mythology, and stars Magnus Chase, Annabeth's cousin. After 3 years of homelessness, Magnus dies in an encounter with a fire giant very early in the first book and ends up in Valhalla, the halls of Odin's chosen warriors who train for the final battle of Ragnarok. The main plot of the series is about Loki trying to set off Ragnarok early, and Magnus and friends venturing throughout the 9 realms trying to find a way to stop him. The second book introduces one of the most talked about characters in the universe, Alex Fierro, a child of Loki born with the power to shapeshift, a gender-fluid character who is kicked out of the house for being trans. She ends up dead, but also gets to go to Valhalla, and becomes a part of Magnus's group. And this is Viking culture, where it's all macho and battle-focused. Her teammates call her Arger, which means unmanly, but Alex has had enough bullshit from life and she's not taking any of it even after death. She's constantly sassy, refuses to take insults from other characters, and constantly asserts herself and her identity. There's a scene early on where Magnus asks her about her identity, and she explains it by saying that her identity changes from time to time. Unlike non-binary or mid-spectrum folks who use they-them pronouns, Alex's gender shifts no matter what form she takes. Most of the time she identifies as female, which is why I use she and her for Alex in videos, but sometimes has very quote-unquote male days. As the series goes on, we get flashbacks to Alex's childhood and story arcs focusing on her, and we see that she's carrying quite a bit of trauma and needs to take the time to process it, maybe with some help from Magnus. All this is good, especially coming from a cishet author, though I do have some criticisms. Don't worry, it's nothing serious. Rick has said that he based Alex off his students struggling with their gender identity, but when Alex is explaining her identity to Magnus, there were some blind spots. For the most part, it's good. Alex even says that Magnus should not use her as an example for all gender fluid or trans folks. Alex says they're non-binary or mid-spectrum or whatever when explaining non-binary folks. I've never heard the term mid-spectrum before, but maybe that's just a me thing. My only complaint here is that the explanation doesn't touch on all the nuances of the topic. First of all, non-binary is a huge umbrella term that encompasses a lot of identities, including gender fluid, agender, bigender, etc. And there are some people of those identities, including gender fluid, who consider themselves non-binary. But it's all down to the individual and how they choose to identify, though this is kind of glossed over. Granted, Alex's gender is always strictly male or female, so it makes sense that she doesn't use the term non-binary, but then there's the pronoun trouble. Pronouns do not equate to gender. Not all non-binary folks use they-them. I'm technically non-binary, being bigender, and while I'm not opposed to being called they or them, I prefer she or her and he and him, because that better reflects how I identify. Mostly all good, just with a few blind spots. That said, Alex could be considered an instance of the non-binary shapeshifter trope, with non-binary characters being non-binary due to their inhumanness, making it seem like being non-binary isn't something regular humans can just be. While Alex isn't human, she is a demigod, half-human technically, and indeed just as human and personable as Magnus or Sam. Speaking of which, Sam is also a child of Loki, but she isn't trans, thus implying that being trans isn't something that someone has just from being a shapeshifter, or even a child of Loki. Also, Alex doesn't shapeshift when her gender identity changes. She has the same base form no matter the pronouns, which I really appreciate because being trans in my experience is far more a social phenomenon than it is a physical or medical phenomenon. And there are trans folks who don't medically transition, for financial reasons or because they don't feel the need to. So having a character who uses different pronouns but remains in the same form despite having the power to shapeshift is something I quite like, and overall I appreciate the effort. But there is one more character I need to at least mention here. Minor spoilers, Magnus himself. Magnus ends up somehow able to tell Alex's gender with a lucky guess after getting to know him. Then he goes in for a kiss, during which he thinks, I'm kissing a boy, but then he thinks, I'm kissing Alex, getting over his own internalized homophobia. I get it. There's a huge chasm between learning to respect LGBTQ people and earnestly considering the possibility that you yourself are one. One of us! One of us! But sexuality, much like gender, is much more fluid than most people realize. The representation is mostly good, and I appreciate it. But I also completely understand why Rick got a queer author to write The Sun and the Star with. Next up, we have a book that is not only trans rep, but also our first instance of ace rep in the video. The Dragon of Yinas. At least, I think that's how it's pronounced. This is undoubtedly the shortest book we'll be discussing today, not counting comics. This book is about Sir Violet, a knight who serves the village of Yinas, which has a dragon camped outside of it, and he likes to take things, but then he gives them up when Violet asks nicely. Then he takes more stuff, and gives that up when Violet comes to him and asks for it back. But then a person disappears, and the dragon denies that he took them. And when Violet goes back to the village and asks what else happened, it turns out there's a lot more going on than he was privy to. The baker's wife's cousin came to the village with a trans daughter. The baker's wife, Holly, is also trans, and she disagreed with the baker, Juniper, on how best to handle it. Juniper thought the child should still boy mode outside of the house, and Holly thought it was okay to be a girl all the time. So Juniper left, and when they explain all this to the dragon, he actually agrees to help them get Juniper back. The remainder of the book is a story about not judging a book by its cover, and that's something you've been taught your whole life and never questioned might not be true. And how raising awareness, possibly via the power of stories, is a powerful way to help people who are misjudged. It's one of the goals I'm trying to accomplish with this video, and this channel as a matter of fact. And in all of this, Sir Violet thinks about raising awareness about people like him, people who don't need to ride off into the sunset with a spouse in their arms. Yep, Violet is Aro Ace, and he's had a misunderstanding when he first came to the village because of it. The book is fairly low stakes, but it's still a story about understanding those who are different and the steps needed to reach it, not just on a personal level, but on a grander scale as well. Now, even though I went over webcomics last time, I do have a couple graphic memoirs I'd like to bring up here. The first one is Transitions, A Mother's Story, a story about a woman named Anne whose kid comes out as a trans man, thus beginning a long process of her learning to accept who her son is, learning about what the word transgender really means, what trans people go through, and what we need from our loved ones. Anne's initial reaction to her son's coming out is not good. She thinks she doesn't really know her own kid all that well and immediately becomes concerned that he's been influenced by social media and he's going to get irreversible medical surgery. But Alex gets a therapist on his side who helps explain the situation to the parents. From then on, we see Anne as she learns more and more about the transgender experience, and she explains it all very well. This might be a good book to give to your friends and loved ones to explain what we are really like, and what we really need the world to understand. You can read the book pretty quickly, but it takes place over the course of years, so the timeline here feels impactful. So despite its short length, it's a very satisfying read. Next up, we've got another graphic novel literally called How to Be Ace by Rebecca Burgess. The whole book is a memoir of growing up surrounded by romance and sex, from school to college to life. And all the times the author tried to fit in with other people, and over again it doesn't work, and she leaves disappointed and feeling like a failure. But she does make progress, developing strong platonic relationships with friends, and she feels more and more comfortable just living with a friend. This escalates until she becomes an adult, and like many of us, she learns the terms aromantic and asexual very late in life, and while it's empowering, she's also experienced every acephobic slur in the book, and it's not pleasant. But she grows and slowly builds a life for herself, creating stories to help other people understand the ace experience. And much like Transitions, it takes some time to explain the important information about the experience being portrayed here. From one ace memoir to another, Limitless, the first poetry collection I've ever talked about on my channel. Not what I usually read, but I wanted to include it here because it was written by fellow ace YouTuber Patrick Becks, also known as Fluently Acespec on YouTube. Fluently Acespec is one of my favorite ace channels on the platform. It's full of insightful perspectives from various parts of the ace and aro perspectives, and even a bit of information from the agender perspective. Patrick usually speaks from his own experience, but he'll also give voice to his fans who have different identities, like being agender, and different experiences. I bring all this up because Limitless is a collection of poems Patrick wrote to voice many experiences that he's had. From when he was young and didn't understand what he was experiencing, to a girlfriend he had to let go of, to all the ace phobia he's experienced when he tells people he's aro ace. And every time he asserts himself when tackling everything he won't get to experience, and his family won't get to experience. I haven't read much poetry since I graduated high school, but I was genuinely surprised at the amount of emotion, and I'd even say anguish, that he was able to convey in so few words. Every poem is contained within 1 or 2 pages, but when combined, they tell a story about a man discovering himself, and making an effort to share his experience with the world, in hopes that it will help others like him find themselves, as well as helping those on the outside understand people like him. It's a similar idea to what was presented in the Dragon of Yinas. Alright, one more, and I've saved my personal favorite for last. The Sunbearer Duology by Aidan Thomas. The best way I can describe this series is by saying it's basically Percy Jackson meets the Hunger Games, but the gods are Mexican-inspired and it's much more high fantasy, taking place in a world that is very much not our own. Reino del Sol was created thousands of years ago by a non-binary creator god named Sol, who also made 3 classes of minor gods to populate and terraform the rest of the world. The Golds, who were powerful but ruled by vanity. The Jades, who were kind but ruled by duty. And the Obsidians, who were clever but ruled by cruelty. Then Sol created the humans, who were mortal but capable of boundless love and joy. The Obsidians rebelled, so of course Sol had to banish them, but they were left weak and their body was in pieces. Fortunately, they could be restored just enough to protect the people of Reino del Sol, but only through a ritual known as the Sunbearer Trials. A competition of 10 demigods, or semi-dioses as they're called in this world, in which the winner is crowned Sunbearer and has to sacrifice whoever got last place, and use their remains to regenerate the Soul Stone at each city in Reino del Sol. Our story picks up thousands of years later, and Reino del Sol more resembles our modern world, with technology, phones, and social media. Our hero is a jade semidios named Teo, son of Quetzal, diosa or goddess of birds. Now, Teo being a jade demigod is important, because the gold demigods are the only ones that are allowed to train at the Special Academy and become heroes, in which they go about the world protecting people like superheroes with their powers. Jade dioses and semidioses are seen as lesser for this, and Teo hates that, to the point where he often pranks the gold semidioses whenever he's forced to socialize with them. Reino del Sol appears to be a fully trans-accepting world in which the variation of gender is much better understood than ours. I mean, that can happen when your creator god is non-binary. Sexuality is also super broad in Reino del Sol, with queer demigods and gods. The latter can even have children from same-sex couples. Teo, due to his heritage, has wings on his back, which at the start of the story, he hates. You see, Quetzal gets her name from the real-life Quetzal bird, a species in which the males and females have different colored feathers. Teo is a trans male who has been able to transition medically almost fully. He's had top surgery, and he's been in testosterone for a few years at this point. But the one thing that won't change about him are his wings. As such, they are a source of serious dysphoria for him, which is immensely frustrating. Not just that, the other kids at school constantly grab at them, especially when he molts, making him feel like an animal in a petting zoo. They're also super awkward to have attached to his back at all times, so he binds them in order to avoid looking at them or allowing people to touch them. I'm not sure of this, but the whole feeling like an animal in a petting zoo read like a metaphor for how trans people are treated in our world today, Reino del Sol being almost completely trans-accepting, so Aidan Thomas came up with this as a way for Teo to still feel alienated and just wanting to be respected like a normal person despite that. People in our world focus on trans surgery and controversy as a way to dehumanize us, asking impersonal questions that they really have no business asking, just as Teo feels dehumanized by people treating him like an animal. The good news is, he has a very heartwarming relationship with his mom. The dioses of Reino del Sol are exceptionally more kind and compassionate compared to the indifferent, chaotic, and often straight-up tyrannical Greek gods, but they are still flawed. Quetzal, however, is one of the most compassionate. Reading these two interact always gives me a sense of the warm fuzzies. But then Teo is chosen by Sol to compete in the Sunbearer Trials. Not just him, another jade semidios named Shio, child of Mala Suerte, the god of bad luck, happened to be chosen as well. Mala Suerte was not happy about this because Shio is only 13, barely old enough to compete. Teo is 17, the max age allowed to compete. And neither of them have any combat training like all of the other competitors. On top of that, Shio doesn't seem to have any obvious semidios powers, meaning that Shio is the most likely candidate for the sacrifice. Mala Suerte cares about his children deeply and fears greatly that his child won't make it through the trials. So Teo resolves to help Shio as best he can. The first trial comes and it's climbing a mountain. Teo sees Shio having trouble, so he does what he can to help. The catch is he realizes he has to use his wings, which he does, breaking his binder in the process. Then his wings change feathers to the point where they now look like the wings of a male quetzal bird. This moment got a fair bit of criticism from trans masc folks, from what I could see. Many trans people, femme or masc, will never be fully satisfied with our bodies, no matter how many doses of HRT we take or surgeries we get. Some parts of our bodies will just never look the way we want them to. There are parts of my body I wish would change, but don't appear to be changing at all, even after a year and a half on HRT. It's all down to genetics. Teo seemed set up to just have to accept his wings as they were, but the problem just solves itself. To be fair, he had been transitioning for years at that point, and this is a fantasy world where literal magic exists, but this still came across as unsatisfying to many of the trans masc folks who responded to my question on Reddit, and on social media in general. Transmasculine folks seemed to enjoy the book overall, and some even gave this moment a pass, but not all of them. You may note that a similar thing happened in Dreadnot, but there the conflict was set up different. Danielle didn't have the same setup of transitioning, but being dissatisfied with her body, as Teo did. Her story was much more about finding accepting people to be around and finding a place for herself in society, whereas Teo was seemingly set up with a conflict that would have been very compelling if he managed to accept never being satisfied with his body, but then the problem fixes itself, making for an underwhelming resolution. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to ruin the book for most of the transmasculine fans who responded to my post, though. Okay, now on to the world. The Sunbearer trials and the sequel Celestial Monsters go all over Reino del Sol, full of every biome imaginable, from rainforests to tundras to mountains and even a volcano. Each Dios has a city they protect designed in their image, along with a temple at the top full of priests. Each one is totally unique and tells a bit of a story in how it's run, though it's also pretty apparent that the world is pretty classist. Gold semi-dioses tend to be arrogant, seeing themselves as above the common folk, and only associate with other gold semi-dioses, not taking jades or the mortals they protect very seriously. The ranking in the Sunbearer trials could also be seen as a metaphor for capitalism, because it creates a system in which people must compete with each other, not even necessarily to be at the top, but to avoid being at the bottom, and there always must be someone at the bottom. There isn't necessarily anything wrong with cooperation and helping each other when we need to, but the system of capitalism says that that is a luxury and that we need to take care of ourselves first and foremost, and this is fundamentally flawed. Teo notices this and asks himself why someone, the person who comes in last place, who may not have even wanted to compete, has to be sacrificed. If it's considered an honor, why can't the sacrifice be voluntary? Even the Hunger Games permitted that, to a point at least. The only condition is that the sacrifice has to be made or the world will literally end. But Teo is not one for just going with the rules as they are. He believes there is a better way. So, is there? I'll leave that up to you to discover, should you choose to read this series. Just don't look at any promotional images. I got spoiled on one of the best plot twists I've ever seen by searching on Pinterest. Don't make that mistake. This duology has honestly been one of my favorite reads this year so far. It's honestly comparable to some of my favorite Riordanverse books, like the Magnus Chase series. And knowing me, that's saying something. But again, you should take what I've said here with a grain of salt. Remember that I'm only one trans and ace person, and I'm trans-feminine, so my ability to judge certain portrayals like the trans-masculine experience is limited. Yes, there is overlap between our experiences, such as experiencing gender dysphoria and euphoria, but there are differences as well. If you have your own queer perspective on one or more of these books to share or other LGBTQ books to recommend, please do so in the comments. Our community is often left to fend for ourselves, but much like Teo and his friends and the heroes of the other books I've discussed today, we can always help each other in times of need. I am Kylan Mythos, and I'll see you all next time.